Her music. April 30. 9th for music that inhumane ally was suffering. A historic day not only for Viet Nam, but also an unforgettable milestone for many. For the victors, this is a testament to history, a testament to the blood and sacrifice of countless generations who fell fighting for national reunification. But for those who lose, even those forced into exile, is this merely a failure? Her music, a brilliant milestone in the arduous journey of national reunification, everywhere erupted with this dramatic diplomatic victory of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. But on the other side of the 17th parallel, in the most closed rooms of the Independence Palace, the atmosphere was not so bright. President Nguyen Van Thieu of the Republic of Vietnam consistently and resolutely opposed this agreement. Only in the final hours, under pressure from the U.S., did he finally back down. This agreement, as far as people know, was nothing more than the first nail driven into the coffin of the South Vietnamese government. After the parties finalized the 1973 Paris Peace Accords, the South Vietnamese government faced numerous serious disadvantages. Looking inward, Thieu saw a chaotic society with a corrupt and incompetent government. They couldn't stand up and fight back against the U.S. in Paris. And now, they can't even roll up their sleeves to solve the problems of the South. They were simply trying to hoard as much public property as possible for themselves. They even have a menu of corruption deals with incredibly attractive prices. $4 for an escort home by local police after the nighttime curfew. Pay 6 times the price to receive a diploma and comfortably go apply for jobs. Just shell out $100 a year to pray for some easy administrative job in the Saigon military. Every act, no matter how small, needs to be lubricated with a little bit of green money. And those most severely affected were government and military officials, because the U.S. is preparing to withdraw its troops. After the peace treaty ends, the aid also gradually disappeared without a trace. Inflation rising, and goods are becoming more expensive. The average salary paid to civil servants is barely enough to live on. So instead of asking Americans for money, they turn to robbing the people. Even Mr. Thieu himself admitted that corruption was the most pressing problem in the South Vietnamese government at the time. Her music, that viewable. That's how it was, and the army didn't make him any more optimistic either. If Paris 1973 was for the Liberation Army, it was a poison pill for the Saigon soldiers. They had a huge advantage in air and naval power, but in terms of morale, they were far inferior to the Liberation Army, an army that has relied on American influence and used American equipment for nearly 20 years will lack fighting spirit. When all of that suddenly, not only did Nguyen Sao Kai, the former vice president of the Republic of Vietnam, understand this perfectly well, but he also knew it inside and out. He reminisced about the time when he could fly across the skies of South Vietnam in modern aircraft supplied by the Americans. If they happen to break, the Chinese embassy will just throw a bunch of new parts in the face of the people in the South and clearly declare that they should just replace them immediately to save time. As a result, people no longer feel the need to meticulously tighten each screw, because they have a brand new component. All you have to do is install it and it will work. Once the Americans took those components and left, nobody could fix the problems with those fighter jet keys anymore. They just lay there, covered in dust, much like the fighting spirit of the South Vietnamese soldiers. The democratic society that Thieu tried to build in the South also inadvertently killed the army. Because, in this society, people will focus on their own personal affairs. They want to get rich and enjoy life. Nobody wants to pick up a gun and rush into fierce combat anymore. Nguyen Dai Hin, a former official in the then communist government, shook his head in dismay, saying that the concept of freedom and democracy was introduced to Vietnam too early, leaving people deaf whenever they heard the call to arm. Other generals, such as Tran Van Don, argued that Thieu had failed in establishing a new social order in the South. Like the North, their mass mobilization efforts were based on the values of independence, unity, and progress towards socialism. People in the South also wanted independence and unity, but they had not yet seen a social order that truly suited them. That alone is enough to make people turn their backs on him. It goes without saying, the situation in South Vietnam after the 1973 Paris Peace Accords was not favorable to Thieu in any way. Society is unstable, and the government is corrupt. The allies are fleeing. Fortunately, Thieu was an optimist. At times like these, all you need is to confidently present a bud to the public. Thieu tried to salvage the last vestiges of resistance from the South, but he was met only with cold indifference from the people. In any case, Thieu understood that the optimism he was projecting wouldn't last long. The gloomy atmosphere that enveloped South Vietnamese society was nothing short of an early obituary for Thieu's regime. Gunfire began to echo across the horizon. Given the circumstances, Shao could only act alone. He crushed all opposition in the 1971 election, including Nguyen Cao Kai and Duong Van Minh. In that election, Kai relinquished his position as vice president and ran for president, because he knew that Thieu's victory would be the death of the Republic of Vietnam. But Thieu is also very cunning. Nguyen Cao Kai acknowledged that there were laws that made it difficult for people to run for office, let alone win. Ho Chi Minh probably couldn't have done any better. Mr. Kai had retired to his garden near Tan Son Nhat Airport, while Mr. Minh was busy with high-class cocktail parties. Water is no longer their responsibility, because they have been sidelined. But it was they who proved themselves more than they could during Saigon's death throes. Returning to the main point, Nguyen Van Thieu outlined a very decisive policy, called for to confront North Vietnam. No coalition government was formed. No territorial compromise with the communists was reached. No communist political activity was permitted in the South. And no neutral foreign policy was pursued. In that context, territorial integrity was the backbone of Thieu's policy. The Republic of Vietnam itself also organized sweeping military operations throughout the South to eliminate the bases of the Liberation Army. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam condemns these actions as blatant violations of Paris Peace Accords. That's the determination. But what's the reality? A drunken army, an ally drifting away, a society turning its back. All of these things caused Thieu's no resolution to gradually crumble. The Liberation Army also carried out campaigns to expand its sphere of influence, which Nguyen Van Thieu condemned as violations of the Paris Agreement. From the latter half of 1973, the base of the Republic of Vietnam gradually collapsed. The biggest loss for the Thieu regime by early 1975 was the loss of the entire Phuoc Long province to the Liberation Army. What's the point of the U.S. completely ignoring these actions? Cao Van Tham, Chief of Staff of the General Staff under Thieu, had to question the U.S. commitment after the 1973 Paris Agreement. The indifferent attitude of the United States and the free world towards the fall of Phuoc long increased skepticism about the ceasefire agreement. People in South Vietnam did not believe the United States would punish the blatant violations committed by the North Vietnamese communists. The trust of the people, the military, and the government is no longer sustainable. Nguyen Van Thieu had to shoulder the burden of the government's fate. It wasn't that he created it in such a context. Life or death depended heavily on this land. Military Region 2 of the Republic of Vietnam, especially the Central Highlands, was a region that Thieu could not afford to lose. With its strategically important location, it serves as a key point for defending and controlling the surrounding areas. From the end of the Saigon government received intelligence about the troop movements of the Liberation Army. In that period, the 320th Division advanced from Duc Co southward to Dak Lak. Along with them, 312th and 341st divisions were also moving south, but no one knew their true destination. This was a diversionary campaign, carried out by the Liberation Army to deceive both the Republic of Vietnam and the United States. Frank Snip, a CIA intelligence analyst, had to admit, I didn't anticipate where the communists would attack first. Although I have taken notice of the unusual troop movements west and north of the magic trade, I do not think we should jump to hasty conclusions. Thieu Lo guessed that the Liberation Army would target the drug trafficking hub of the largest city in the Central Highland, but Pem Van Phu, who was entrusted with the position of Commander of Military Region, ignored the information that was sent to him. He believed that the communists' moves in the drug trade were merely a diversion, and that their real goal was to play games and capture prisoners. Therefore, he only deployed a small force to guard the provincial capital of Dak. All the remaining elite troops were sent to play Yuan Khan Tum. By the time the wealthy general realized his decision was a mistake, it was already too late. In the early morning of May 10, 1975, the Liberation Army unexpectedly opened fire and launched a magical attack. By midday the following day, the main targets in the city were essentially